Howdy, folks. You're back for another week of Follow the Leader. I am your host, Lee Larson, and I'm sitting here with Alex Zambito. Alex, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Alex Zambito is working in Manhattan. Currently, he is from Savannah, Georgia. He is a Catholic, as a Catholic worker working in a variety of different formats in Manhattan. Thank you for your service. And you're out of Savannah, Georgia. Talk to us about how you got from, finding Catholicism in Georgia to working in New York. Those are some jumps.
So yeah, like you mentioned, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. So I grew up in a Catholic family. I went to the parish of it's called St. Anne's in Richmond Hill, Georgia. So a little bit outside of Savannah, but I spent most of my time like growing up in Savannah. Um, well, okay, that would have to we'd have to put in a pause there. But yeah, okay. Can I restart that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, all
So
right.
tell me, Alex, where you were born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. You were raised Catholic, and now you're currently working in New York and attending Brooklyn College. You identify as a Catholic socialist. Talk to us about how you came from Georgia to New York and your Catholic journey.
Okay, yeah. As you mentioned, I'm from Savannah, Georgia, or a little bit outside of Savannah, a place called Richmond Hill. So I grew up in a Catholic family, and I went to St. Anne's Parish in Richmond Hill, which is a very small parish. Which I think that's kind of a big part of why I'm Catholic and kind of like why I returned to Catholicism. We'll get more into that story later of how I moved away. But I think a big part of it is just having this kind of community. Like this is people's first like sort of sense of community when they're growing up is in a church. Like we used to have something called we called it Holy Dish Cover Hour, where it basically was like a big potluck, and then everyone got together into the church afterwards to like say the rosary. So for me, it was like a big part of my experience like growing up in church was like this was where I would like hang out with my friends. We all kind of like knew each other, like the whole town, like everyone knew each other that went to that church. So it's really like this sort of first like sense of community that people get. And for me, like a big reason why I ended up returning to the church was I grew up, me and my sister had a nanny, and Papa, when we were growing up, nanny was from England and she was very devout Catholic. Um, we would like clean the church with her each Sunday, pretty much like every once a week we'd go and clean the church with her. So like that was just kind of like this very big formative experience for me. Just having this person I really cared about that also really cared about the church. And so like just thoughts about her have always kind of like drawn me back to the church. And just like how that's still like an important part of my life. But going from there, part of like growing up in the South, even like with Catholics, is it's still very obviously conservative. So I ended up going to an all boys Catholic military school for high school, which is yeah interesting. And I think I went through probably starting around my high school years, kind of reacting to the kind of conservative theology that I grew up with as I was moving more politically to the left when I was in like high school and college. This kind of break with the church, I definitely went through like a Richard Dawkins like anti-theist phase for a while, and including like an obnoxious militant atheist Marxist phase
Yeah.
too, because I definitely moved more like my politics further to like radical left after I graduated college, and that's kind of like where I started interacting with Marxism more. So I definitely had a couple year period, at least a few years, where I was also just like, one of the obnoxious Marxists that like really hates religions, really quoting that of the masses quote that gets taken out of context all the time. So I really love that. um, Actually, ironically, it was moving to New York that like really kind of pushed me back into religion. I kind of began exploring like other faiths like Islam and like Buddhism and other religions, and that kind of like brought me back into an idea of like having a relationship with God. And then ultimately, I think I ended up going back to the church because I, large part, discovered liberation theology, which has like been a um, very influential for me, very inspiring for me, and how to like think about religion and how it relates to oppressed people. But also finding a parish community that I liked. So I go to St. Francis Xavier here in New York City, and just kind of having a more progressive faith community was also like a big part of that. And then obviously tapping into the Catholic worker. So I think like really for me, faith most importantly comes down to like community and caring for other
Mm,
people, and particularly caring for the oppressed. So that's kind of like what's um yeah, so I think that really like dovetails with my values, my political values as well.
Absolutely. And that's something that um we're looking at a very interesting unfolding of how theology is impacting people's politics, their economics, all of it. Um, can you talk to us about that Marxism chapter of your life when it was rejecting all religion and Marxism? Um, and was that really all it was just, like, softening your position on religion so that you could have a personal relationship with God? Because that is a concern for a lot of folks is that Marxism can be so militant atheistic.
Mhm.
So what, um how did you make that yeah, it's a big monkey bar swing.
I think so. First of all, I would think like my idea of like religion in that time was a very kind of flattened view of like the history of religion, kind of just thinking about like the church and Christianity has basically just served as like this tool of oppression. And that's pretty much it. It's just this thing that people have used, like the church and powerful people have used to control people. And that's like, I don't like that. I don't like that it's used as like this tool of oppression. But I think for me, part of it was like learning more deeply about the history of religion and particularly like historical figures um, who were religious, who had like radical politics, and particularly like learning about, like I said, liberation theology and how Marxists were willing and able to um, collaborate and work with Christians. Like one of my favorite people is Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, one of my favorite books, and he collaborated with liberation theologians throughout his like whole career, and that was like very big in like Brazil and other places. Nicaragua, obviously, you have the Sandinistas collaborated with Christian communities, Christian-based communities, which we can talk about based communities in a second. But one of my favorite people is also Ernesto Cardenal, who's a priest who like lived in a remote area in Nicaragua called Slentaname, and just how there's a book called The Gospel of Slentaname that I think like really like took brought it home to me. It's this idea of like talking to people that the poor and oppressed can read the Bible and interpret it by themselves and kind of create their own theology that basically answers or like helps them navigate the situation that they live in and the particular like a system of oppression. So for me, seeing that and seeing how those conversations can be had and how you have these people who are religious because they've been raised religious, but being able to like engage with the Bible and interpret it in this like liberatory fashion was super like inspirational for me. It's like you just like, it really opens up the Bible to you that way. Because when you stop thinking about it as like, oh, the Bible says this and this is like the strict letter of the Bible, I need to believe like evangelicals believe, like how super literal and everything, and how really it's kind of like a book that people can engage with and use it to relate to their current reality and can draw up their own interpretations and take it like in the direction that they want to or how it like relates to their lives. So that's like a big part. That's why like I think base communities, which for anybody who doesn't know, base communities were basically like they are considered like the basic atom of like your kind of like church community, where it's like the community around you kind of get together and have like obviously your regular church, but also just things like mutual aid can come out of it, like interpretations of the Bible come out of it, and just kind of like this sort of political and collective engagement that I think is super important. So like really understanding that like opened me up more to religion, particularly going back to Catholicism, realizing that it can be a very powerful way to engage with oppressed people who by and large still are religious no matter
Mm.
like where you go. But also it just kind of complicated the idea of like Christian history and church history for me. So this like allowed me to start going back and digging up other like religious figures that I find super compelling. One of my favorites, I recently read an article about him, but Saint Basil, who has like this all these like great teachings about basically social justice. His whole quote about like that extra coat you have in your closet belongs to the poor. So like all of these that were basically a lot of them are very similar to like Marxist ideas. Like basically what he talks about is he like basically in religious terms articulates an idea of like what Engels talks about with like social murder, or with like primitive accumulation. So kind of seeing the seeds of these ideas in these early church fathers. Saint Basil lived in the 4th century, like AD. So like seeing these ideas um being expressed even that long ago is kind of like the seed of this. And then also just like going through history, learning more about other religious figures, like even that aren't Catholic, like Gerard
Yeah.
Winstanley, who's one of the diggers in the English Revolution. I love him. And then learning about like the civil rights movement. I'm from the South. A big part of these organizations, like a lot of this organizing occurred through churches. Obviously, MLK was himself a pastor, but also you have like people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who's also one of my favorite historical figures. She was a very religious person, and she was very influential in Mississippi during the civil rights movement. So learning all of these histories and how people have taken religion and used it to inspire their fight for liberation has just been very influential for me. And seeing that you can kind of take something that can be turned into this like super conservative and oppressive thing and interpret it your own way and come out with something that is like liberatory. So
Um,
yeah.
well, and that's a great point because, like you said, Catholicism is typically understood as something very, like you said, conservative. And then, of course, you've got the images of the grand sanctuaries and the stained glass and, right, Catholics, like, y'all and y'all's architecture, you got that on lock for sure. But there's definitely that sort of ornateness that people know about the Catholic Church, and some people are like, "Hmm, what do you taught let expand on that." How is Catholicism I know we talked about preferential, treatment for the poor. Expand on that with socialism. How does Marxism and Catholicism work together?
Yeah, so I think it's Christianity is sort of my why, and I think like Marxism is sort of the how. So
Uh,
I believe as a Christian that Gerard Winstanley said that the earth was like created as a common treasury for all of us. That is supposed to be common. You're not supposed to like people dividing it up into their own private property is going against what God wanted us to do. And particularly if that means that some people go without their like basic necessities. So this whole like that is like just my general philosophical outlook that I think comes is rooted in my faith of like thinking that, everyone as um a bearer of the image of God, everyone as like a child of God deserves to be able to live a not only just like having basically having their basic needs met, but also being able to live like a rich and fulfilling life, where they're not just like worrying about how do I get my basic needs met, where they are actually able to engage with faith and actually spend their time reveling and you know appreciating the beautiful world that God has given us. So this whole idea of that, yeah, that everyone has the right to being able to enjoy God's bounty, and then Marxism for me is just a very good way of like materially analyzing the world and showing like pathways of how can we get to that sort of future. So how can we struggle how can we analyze our world and act in our world to shape it to the way we want it to be, to where people can live a better life. Like Peter Morin, one of the founders of the Catholic Worker, he said, "We're trying to make a world where it's easier for people to be good. Like we're just trying to make it a world where it's easier for people to exist and love each other and live in and like love nature and like live in community with each other and in nature and other, well, I keep saying nature, um but like live in with an appreciation of like what God has given us as humans and yeah, as our not human siblings." So
and that's especially like you see these, like we saw Catholicism and socialism, but we also see this play out in immigration. The Pope Leo just recently came out with a remark about climate change. So there is quite, I mean, we're talking about God's natural bounty, the abundance. Um, and you can and you see like, okay, well, of course, the Catholic Church is going to speak out against environmental issues. This is God's earth, and of course, the Vatican is going to speak out against immigration because it's a global Jesus, it's a global God, and borders. are can seem so philosophical or political or just um, so earthly. Um, Talk about when you went through. I guess a lot of folks are confused. What is the difference between socialism and communism? What is Marxism? Just give us a 101.
That kind of depends on who you ask.
Yeah, true.
Because to like a Marxist, uh, the only socialism is scientific socialism. And then even within Marxism, you have like different ideas of, I guess, how that's defined. Like Lenin, I think, says that socialism is just like the path to communism. It's like the stage that you go through when you're trying to get to communism. And then other people say different things. Like some people say it's the abolition of the commodity form, all these other things. Mainly for me, the main point of communism is just the means of production. It's like what we're talking about, like factories, the things that produce other things. So like, you know, the machines that produce other machines, those sorts of things, those are held in common. They're held in common and they are managed directly by the people who work them. So that's basically, I think, the fundamental thing of what we mean by communism. It's that those, like the factories, how we produce things, and our systems of production are brought under the management and of basically democratic control. So it's the idea that, you have a direct control and direct autonomy over your workplace. Because a big thing with Marxism is the idea of like alienation, right? That when you make a product and it is taken away from you by an owner to be sold on a market, it is alienated from you. That is your labor that has just been alienated and taken away from you and used to make a profit for somebody else. So it's no longer like your product went to, that your labor went into and you benefiting from it, someone else takes it and benefits from it. So it's kind of getting rid of that idea, the idea um, that one person can basically monopolize the means of production and force force other people to work for them. So the idea of communism is kind of getting away from that. Um, and then depending on who you ask what socialism means, it can mean a lot of different things to different people. Because you have like more utopian socialist that Frederick Engels wrote a whole, book kind of denouncing. So you have like more, so you have like different ideas of socialism. You have like kind of some of like the pink tide socialism that's happened in like the Latin American countries, which sometimes kind of takes more of the form of like social democracy. So yeah, it really just kind of depends. But for me, yeah, it is basically the idea of democratizing your workplace, making it to where workers control the things that they produce and how they produce them.
And then, when you moved to New York recently, the city of New York has just elected a Muslim mayor who very openly is claiming democratic socialism. Um, what does that do for your movement? Are you seeing a lot more support? Is it actually adding in a lot more voices and now things are clashing? Because you're very educated, very knowledgeable on what you're talking about, and so I'm wondering, with all these different points of view, how has it been navigating this moving forward in New York? What have you heard and seen?
Uh, well, I mean, he got inaugurated, um, not too long, like obviously, earlier this month. So it hasn't like been a whole lot he's been able to do. Um, but I guess I'm more in the camp of we can't really be putting our faith into politicians because I mean, he's also already made moves kind of, at least tampering, what would the word be? Tamping down expectations, on what he's actually going to do. And he also has made like statements like condemning certain pro-Palestine protests that have happened in the city for some of the things they've said, like supporting resistance, like armed resistance in Palestine. So, I think it's important to realize that we can't really count on or depend on politicians to really make this change because ultimately, if you put your faith in like one person, they're kind of the chances that they're going to get like co-opted by the much more powerful Democratic Party um, are pretty strong. And he's already made some moves towards like ingratiating himself with some establishment figures. But I still have some hope that, he can get some good things done. But for me, it's more the whole point of doing these sort of political like campaigns and stuff is to be able to engage and is basically to be able to engage more people with your movement. That's the whole point. Is like you're trying to create a mass movement where the masses of people are engaged with it, and you're trying to draw them to like an actual independent socialist organization, not one that is kind of coattailing the Democratic Party, which is one of my sort of criticisms of the DSA. Is I think they are somewhat too much attached to the Democratic Party. So I think the goal should be mainly used to kind of draw the goal of like you doing political campaigns is to agitate in order to draw more people into an independent militant like socialist movement or communist movement, communist party. So that's like the goal with someone like Zoran is that he does get all of this great exposure. So it needs to be used in order to establish long lasting relationships with people, with the masses of people that you actually want to bring in to your organization. It can't just be like, we got this dude elected and now he's just going to do these things for us and it's going to be great. Because even if he attempts to do some of the things that are in his like platform and in his what he's offering, is that it's going to get like so much resistance from the powerful people, the powerful establishment in New York City, that it's going to require like actual mass movement, mass support, mass agitation in order to actually compel these people to allow those reforms to go through. So I think that's kind of like a big thing is we kind of have to understand that getting a person elected, that's just the beginning of the work. It's just, it's step one. The rest is going to
Yeah.
be like getting people out into the streets to demand these actual reforms to make sure that they actually happen and to hold these people we elect accountable. Because that's kind of like a big problem is how do you actually create a mechanism to like hold these kind of progressive politicians accountable? Because you have like, politicians like AOC who kind of say good things, but then they go and vote, to give more money to Israel and, to give them weapons and then come out with an excuse like, oh, it's only defensive weapons. It's like, that was bullshit. It's always been bullshit. So, uh, how like basically finding ways to like hold people, these like politicians accountable, which I don't know, that's kind of an ongoing question. Because what I notice is people tend to get more defensive over these politicians they like than trying to actually uh, push them to like hold up to like live up to the promises. But then you also have, I think, people who have a knee jerk, like we just need to totally reject this politician. And for me, I'm like, uh, hmm, the idea of total rejection of a politician. Um, let me think. Sorry, I'm trying to think.
No, I mean it's valid. It's you have a little bit what it sounds like is the Catholic in you has some grace. Is what it sounds like. You're not totally rejecting, but I
It
hear what
seems
you're
like
saying.
to me, it seems like it's like an uphill battle trying to like uh fight that. It's better to, or it's like more effort than it's really worth trying to like get all these people to to dislike this politician that they were just liking. It's like trying to kick water uphill. You're not going to get very far. So it's easy to just try and like you know maybe make your criticisms, but also try and like really be trying to pull people into like a further radicalization rather than just a blanket rejection.
So then talk to me about you've brought up Southern Catholic worker. Talk to me what a day or a week in the life of what you do looks like.
Right. Mm. So and I live at St. Joseph's House in Manhattan, and Monday through Friday we run a soup kitchen out of our house. So usually starting at 8, get up, go downstairs, and we start setting up. Uh, we usually open up around like 9:30, and then we have guys come in. They get to have like the goal is for them to be able to come in, get a nice hot meal, and also be able to like sit and chill and just kind of talk to people, like have like a little sense of community and a sense of like comfort and just like a sense of personalism, like the idea that we care about you as an individual person. So I think that's kind of like the goal. Do we always live up to that? Not really. We're imperfect people. So, um, but that's the goal. That's like what we're trying to go for is to give people like help, a decently healthy meal. They get to come like right now, we're in the middle of winter. They get to come in where a place is warm. They have access to a bathroom, which for most people, like a lot of homeless people, that's a big issue. It's not being able to go to the bathroom whenever they want.
Right?
So that's kind of like what we do on a day-to-day basis, Monday through Friday. We are usually done. We usually stop serving around 11, then have like a community lunch. And then after that, it's kind of what's up to you. I like to go to the gym, read, um, or like I usually say, we have an old one of our elder members likes to say vespers every night, which is like evening prayer. So I go
Oh,
usually pray
yeah.
with her each night. So yeah, that's usually kind of like a day-to-day thing. And then we also have like other, just at times have other events. So like every Friday we have something called we have Friday night meetings for the clarification of thought is the idea, or what it's called. The idea was by Peter Morin, one of the founders. His whole thing was like we need to get together once a week and have discussions so we can kind of like be clearer on what our goals are and what our analysis is and kind of where someone usually has a presentation, then we have like a little discussion afterwards or something like that. It's just a really good opportunity to open the house to like the public and let people come in and kind of like learn what we're about and what our community is about. So those are like the main things. We also have like engagement with other organizations in New York. So like for instance, Food Not Bombs, which is like a mutual aid group where,
Yeah.
they use our kitchens on Sunday afternoons to like cook and they take the food to the park. So just kind of that, hopefully, trying to engage with other organizations too in the city is also a big thing. And that's like kind of my opinion, a big like part of the workers' history. So one of the very early things that Dorothy Day, one of our founders, like what the work was involved with was a seaman strike here in New York. I can't remember if they were actually like, people guys who work on the boats or if they just like worked at the docks, but they went on strike. And the house basically, provided them with food, places to stay, when they weren't on the picket line, that sort of stuff. So really kind of also engaging with labor movements because uh, people need food. People need to be able to eat. And like that's also a big part for us, especially like we mentioned immigration earlier. A lot of we don't, we're obviously not like checking IDs when guys come in to eat. So a lot of the people we end up serving, most likely immigrants. And people need like people need food to be able to survive to get through their daily lives, and it helps people be able to like meet their needs and like be able to stay in the country, that sort of thing. So it's like I like to say people can't eat burning cop cars. So it's kind of important to make sure to like kind of try and care for people as well and meet their basic needs.
Yes, and it's I love that you're working with and mutual aid groups and with others, not reinventing the wheel. And there's so much that we don't. I think if there's one group on earth, like Catholics have been in the business of helping folks for a long time. That's like y'all y'all know a thing or two about it. So um it's cool to see that evolve and then also to see liberation theology collide and it makes sense. I also studied he's back there pedagogy of the oppressed. I have that back there as well and was introduced to that this past year actually. I've been reading bell hooks for a while, but him specifically. Um what other authors or influences have helped shape you, especially in the last maybe year or so?
Hmm. Well, obviously, you've got Karl Marx. He's the big dog. But I read Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Prison Letters. He's really cool. He's one of my favorite, I guess, 20th century religious figures. He obviously went to jail under the Nazis and was, I think, implicated in the plot to assassinate Hitler. But really cool guy. I really liked him. I just finished Graham Antonio Gramsci's Prison Notebooks, and he's also really influential for me. I really like his ideas on like hegemony and like organic intellectuals. Like for me, was his idea of like organic intellectuals is that each class kind of produces their own intellectuals. So like the proletariat produces an intellectuals, bourgeoisie produces intellectuals, and these are the intellectuals that come out of these classes. And what's important is if you actually want to serve your class, is to actually remain engaged with them as well. So like for me, that's a big part of like living in like a place like the Catholic Worker, because it makes sure that you're still engaged with the people that you're ultimately like you're trying to learn in order to um advance these people's struggle. Like so it's important to like remain engaged with them, because like that's a big thing I've noticed like in academia and like being in grad school, is that it's kind of like, how do you make all this stuff relevant to poor people and to oppressed people, the people that actually need it? Like there's like subaltern studies, like how do you make these things actually relevant to the subalterns, because most of them are probably never going to have access to like a call to college to be able to read these texts or anything like that. So how do you make it relevant to them in their everyday lives? And that's like where Gramsci holds like a lot of meaning for me, I think. I don't know, I'm trying to think about what else I read this year. Oh, well, this isn't really, I didn't read it this year, but a very influential book for me has been Hammer and Hoe. Forget the author, but it's a book about like communist labor organizing in the South, particularly like the rural South, and just kind of like this talking about um the efforts that were made there to like begin organizing. And that was super influential, because like one thing that really stuck out to me is like, on the left, you're always going to get this argument that keeps popping up every once in a while, like people need to read theory, but that's ableist, or like people can't read theory, or there's an argument about like reading. And what was really stuck out to me is that like communist organizers in like Alabama would stand in rooms or street corners and like read papers out loud to other people who couldn't read them. And just like these efforts to, just seeing how all of these people put in this much effort to like being able to learn and being able to like uh understand like all of these complicated topics and how they relate to their everyday lives was like super inspirational to me. It's a matter of organizers and people making these things accessible to people who might have like other um, complications with being able to, like, if they have like a reading disability or something. It's about making this knowledge accessible for people and making sure they are exposed to it. So that was also a book that's like really had a strong influence on me.
One of the things you talk about in that was being with the people, taking action, the efforts of people. Something that you have included in your bio online is your respect and admiration for John Brown. Um, Folks, I also went and visited I read quite a bit on John Brown last year and visited Harper's Ferry last spring. But I really want Alex to introduce John Brown to you folks. Alex, talk to me. How did you learn about John Brown, and who is John Brown to you? Why is he so meaningful?
Well, I think I mainly remember John Brown from obviously like middle school, high school, when you get exposed to him a little bit. You get a little paragraph. John Brown, he did the heart rate on Harper's Ferry. He hated slavery. He was crazy, and that's it. You pretty much get those like that little bit. For me, he's just very important because he really is a great demonstration on how to be in solidarity with the oppressed. Because not only did he devote his life to the abolition of slavery, like he's a very obviously very hardcore abolitionist based on what he did, but to him, it wasn't a matter of like being. hmm, To him, he was also he considered himself a servant of the people that he was trying to help liberate. And if you see throughout his life, he didn't just like do what he thought only was correct. He's the entire time he is engaging with black people, with black abolitionists, black leaders, and asking their opinions on what he should do. It's not just like he was like, I know I'm right and I'm going to go do this. He would constantly ask and engage with black people about how they think he should wage this struggle. It's like he's obviously very good friends with like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, but also in his life when he died, he's buried up at North Elba. That's where his family home is. But North Elbow for him uh, was kind of an experiment on black people and white people being able to like live together in a community, because the main community up there were black people that can't I remember one of his actors, I forget, one of the Secret Six, who are the guys that gave him money. I forget his name. George something, maybe. I don't know, we can cut that out. But one of his benefactors had donated all of this land up in upstate New York to have like black people who are, I think, believe were freed from slavery to go settle up there and be able to like start farms. So John Brown went up there to try and help people, to try and help the people as they settled. So he had a little bit of experience like surveying land and that sort of stuff, but also just the way he would interact with the people in this community would literally scandalize pretty much any other white people. Like there's a story of like these white travelers that got lost. They come across the Browns' house, and the Browns invite them in for dinner. And at dinner, there's a black couple that's eating dinner with them, and they're all super shocked to see that not only are those black people sitting with them at the table, he's also like referring to them as sir and madam and all this other stuff. Like the way he just refers to them is like different than they'd experienced with any other white person. So he is like very like out of the mold of like what the general white person is. And I think to him, he wouldn't even think that was anything special. He'd be like, yeah, that's just how you're supposed to treat people, you asshole. Like, and that's basically like, so to him, he wasn't like doing anything special. One of his favorite sayings was, God is no respecter of persons, which means that God does not like have any sort of like favorites based on your race. So to him, like this whole idea of like black and white people being equal are just like, that's just how it is. He's not like that. It's not anything special to him. But also, his solidarity went beyond just black people in a way that's like unique for him, even as like a 19th century abolitionist, because he had also had no matter where he lived, he always had positive relations with like indigenous people. There's one story from, I think it's like 1829, when he's like, believe he was living in Ohio. I could be wrong about where he's living, but there's a whole story where the white settlers in the community come up to him and be like, hey, these indigenous people keep coming through our land because it used to be like their old hunting land or something. They're traveling through our land and we want your help to get rid of them. And John Brown looks at him, he says, I will have no part in so mean an act. I would rather take up my gun and fight you instead. And I just think that's like, that's very representative of him as a person. So his solidarity went beyond just, the main thing he's known for, went to other people as well. And it was his whole person. It wasn't just like part of him. It was like his whole life, his whole commitment to what he was like, what his goal in life was. He even says in a meeting very early on, I consecrate my life to the abolition of slavery, and he lived up to that. Like he goes to the Kansas territory, does his whole thing there, becomes like basically a guerrilla fighter, kills some slave owners and slave supporters, and then he does his raid on Harper's Ferry, which I think this is like it's not an original take, but I think it's like outside of like, I think a lot of times a general opinion is I think his raid on Harper's Ferry possibly could have worked. It didn't have any chance of working the way he hoped it was going to work. But if they had like fled Harper's Ferry sooner and gone into the mountains, they could have at least escaped and possibly been started some sort of like guerrilla movement in the mountains. Yeah, they probably would have been. I don't know how successful it would have been, but they could have gotten away. But like ultimately, his whole theory depended on this idea that he had, and that was unique to him among abolitionists, is that not only were black people equal, they were also equally capable of fighting, and that they were willing to fight for their freedom. That was a big disagreement between him and other abolitionists, even like William Lloyd Garrison, who was like a very famous abolitionist as well, is that pretty much most of other abolitionists believed that black people were not only were black people, a lot of them didn't believe black people equal, but also they didn't believe that they were able to fight. They believed they would be incompetent at fighting, and that they were also they were too docile to want to fight. So this sort of idea of black people as incapable and too subservient to being able to fight. And also, if you look at a lot of abolitionists at the time, most of them, like I said, did not believe that black people were fundamentally equal. A lot of them were still like William Lloyd Garrison supported colonization theory, or like, the idea of sending black people back to Africa to start their own
Right.
country in Africa. He still believed in that. Well, I think well into the 1850s. And that's true for a lot of abolitionists, is that a lot of them um, not only didn't believe that black people were equal, they still wanted to do like ideas like colonization, like sending black people back to Africa. And they really didn't do it out of this sort of sense that, at least a lot of them weren't doing it out of this sort of sense of like, um, we believe black people are equal and we want them to be free. It was usually different than that.
Mm. Yeah, last night at the my local library, I gave a talk on Thomas Jefferson and just how that was a conversation in the correspondence he has in his later letters, where he is talking about we need to send the enslaved to Cuba, to Haiti. There's a line that I'm going to butcher, I know, but it was like, for if we free them of handcuffs, they'll reach for daggers and they'll come for us. And they were so scared of retribution um, that they were like, well, let's just keep up this nightmare and send them to a third location or second
Yeah.
location. Just truly. But I appreciate you giving me a bit more clarity and the audience a bit more clarity on why John Brown was not just, it wasn't just that he was belligerent and, like you said, ran around um, shooting up slave owners. It was that he fundamentally had a different outlook than a lot of other white abolitionists did at his time, which goes to show that, I mean, um, which thank God he did, because that's what led to Harper's Ferry. Um, so, well, as we look ahead at everything going on, are there either words of anger or words of comfort or any other words that you would like to share with the audience from with anything going on in this country? Um,
I would just say John Brown's job isn't done. We still, I mean, even after you have the Civil War and technically the abolition of slavery, you have its reintroduction, pretty much 20 years later with Southern Redemption and, the implementation of like mass incarceration later on. So, I mean, that struggle is still ongoing. And we still have all of these historical figures that showed a lot of bravery and showed like great examples for us. Um, in even worse circumstances a lot of times. So just kind of drawing on this past of what people have been able to do when they come together and fight for something good. Like, we see in like Minneapolis, even though you see like the horror of cops shooting a woman in the face in her car, you also see the mobilization of that community to defend themselves and defend their neighbors. Like you see people going on the street to defend like their Somali neighbors, and I saw a video of a Somali man sitting in his car, just being like, this. I know he's like this. Being able to see this makes me feel like welcome. Like people like don't all hate me. They want me to be able to be here and be safe too. And you could see he appreciated it. So it's just, yeah, this idea that we have, we may not have a lot of power, but we have each other, and we have each other to be able to care for one another, and that's what it's going to take. It's going to take resistance, but also perseverance. That and you're going to need to be able to be there for each other, and particularly we as a man, I'll say men need to make sure that all of that work doesn't fall on women, because that's how it has traditionally been. Like go back and look, a lot of radical movements, a lot of the caretaking work happens through women. So as guys, I think it's important that we take on more of that work as well. And I think that's what helps me stay at least somewhat optimistic, is that we do have each other, even if we can't necessarily count on politicians or the power or people who are powerful. So
Thank you for those beautiful words. And um, Alex, can you tell the audience how can we support you or anything that you care about? Where can we go?
So you can find me at Southern Catholic Worker on Instagram. I'm also on Twitter, although that's like a hellhole. So do what you're gonna do. I don't know. Other than that, if you want to support, I guess, the work we do, you can look up the Catholic Worker. We have a website. You can look into our newspaper. We have the New York Catholic Worker produces I believe, bi-monthly newspaper. I have a couple articles in them. So check out the paper, maybe send in a donation or something, but also look into your own community because you might have a Catholic worker nearby. They're all over the country. So, just look into it and see if there's any way you can tap in and help these houses because I'm sure they could all use some assistance. So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here, Alex. I know that you're busy. You are in grad school at Brooklyn College and you have got a full plate. So I appreciate your time. Folks, this was another episode of Follow the Leader. I am your host. Joining me today is Alex Zambito of Southern Catholic Worker or the Catholic Worker, depending on which direction you're going. But um, thank you for meeting with me today, Alex. And next week, I can't wait. We'll have another guest. Tune in next time. This is Lee with Follow the Leader. See ya.
thank you.
All right. Let me stop the recording.